The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I am speaking with Dr. Andrew Hartz of the Open Therapy Institute. And this is another installment of a lovely conversation series we've been having on all kinds of topics related to therapy, social justice, DEI, all these issues that have really been bubbling up in the applied psychology fields. And today, you were raising something right before we got on that is really interesting. It's some inherent contradictions in the social justice ideology. And before we get into that, I just want to quickly plug a workshop that Open Therapy Institute has coming up on February 15th. And there's another one in March. And so we've got fantastic workshops. Check them out. If you haven't already, you can go to the webpage, opentherapyinstitute.org, and look at all the offerings there. And we'll give more details at the end of this conversation for anybody who's interested.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, those it's so supportive of what we do when people sign up for those, and it helps us do more innovative work there. Um, yeah, so I think one of my really one of the claims that I'm really focused on is how we've had rules about what you can talk about and not talk about on a wide variety of topics. And I think that fosters really unhealthy psychological dynamics. People repress feelings and thoughts that they have, observations they have, questions they have. People also become very dysregulated and they lose the ability to think in a mature, coherent way that's integrated and balanced. Um, we could call that mentalization ability or reflective functioning ability. People's reflective functioning in general is very poor around any of these topics where you're forbidden from talking about them in a nuanced way. And one example of this that I think is a topic that's like this is just the concept of diversity itself. Diversity is framed as an all good entity that has no costs, risks, or challenges. It's very idealized as a perfect, all good, no downside concept, which it clearly isn't. Like, I think anybody who stops for a second can realize, like, obviously diversity comes with challenges and risks and costs. And you can think that the balance is heavily in favor of diversity, but it's hard to argue that there's no challenges and costs. And so, one of the ways that you see this inability to talk about diversity in a nuanced way is just within the social justice literature itself, that people in that movement or in the DEI movement, they really idealize diversity again as this like perfect entity. But their arguments themselves in the social justice movement are actually some of the most strident and harsh critiques of diversity as a functional concept. It's just really counterintuitive. But if you think for a second, like if diversity requires massive bureaucracies of staff to constantly indoctrinate people, regulate speech, censor, discriminate, uh, you start to think maybe diversity does, at least you have to pay for those bureaucracies and potentially lose merit-based standards, lose speech, have to be constantly indoctrinated. There's clearly costs, and those costs aren't being proposed by the right. Like they're saying the left is saying, if you don't do this, diversity won't work. In order for diversity to work, you have to have this. But there's lots of other concepts in the social justice movement that imply that diversity is mostly negative. And if they could advocate for race segregated spaces, for example, because it's such a stress or even a trauma to be in diverse spaces that you need these segregated spaces. There are arguments that, and Mike Strambler has written really beautifully about this concept of the inability to empathize across racial lines, that like white people can't understand black people and possibly vice versa. There's this unbridgeable gap between the races and the ability to understand people across racial lines. That's a pretty big barrier to functional diversity. It's a pretty big cost. To think that there are unconscious biases, unconscious racism, microaggressions everywhere you look that are really traumatizing. It paints diversity as this like hellish nightmare of a constant attacks that causes severe mental illness en masse. It's that's a really big cost to diversity. Um, you can think about we have to tear down entire institutions and rebuild them from scratch totally because they're inherently biased in ways that we can't really even understand or fix without demolishing them and rebuilding them. Um, the idea that you need a therapist of your race, you need teachers of your race. You need mentors of your race. You need to watch movies with people of your race. You need your race. And it's like this, if that's really true, if it's such a benefit and a privilege to have people of your race around in all of these roles, and it's such a hardship to lack that, it implies that diversity inherently you're going to encounter a lot of people that aren't your race. So if that really is inherently a hardship that needs to be remedied, that's a pretty big cost. There's people say you have to censor speech and outlaw hate speech and get rid of equal standards that um, uh, the argument that race is really central to people's identity, that these ethnic identities are really primary, and that assimilation is bad and shouldn't happen, and maybe even needs to be fought against. That it's easy to see, if we need all of these laws and all of these bureaucracies and all of this indoctrination and training and teaching and education and tech and media and video games. We need constant propaganda, censorship, discrimination, billion-dollar bureaucracies, constant HR, constant and total restructuring of things. And it's still a hellish nightmare for it. It really doesn't take long before you say, this makes diversity seem not just like there's a lot of costs, but that, and not just that the costs outweigh the benefits, but ultimately that I think it's not even functional. Like it's
Mhm.
not desirable and it's not functional, and everybody seems to be made miserable by this by a multicultural society. And it's really easy to come to that conclusion if you take all of the claims from the social justice movement at face value. It paints this horrible picture of multiculturalism itself. And so there is this weird split between when they talk about diversity in the abstract, it's this perfect thing that only somebody horribly evil and ignorant could not want. But when they then talk about what's needed to make diversity work and the real hardships that are embedded in it, they're so severe and extreme that it doesn't even seem workable as an idea. And it just makes people want to say, well, then this whole thing isn't going to work. Like
Mhm.
basically,
Mhm.
if those claims are true.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you're addressing this and trying to organize your thoughts around it, because one of the things you addressed in the very beginning of that statement was about the repression of speech and thought, and the tendency to become disorganized in your thinking around some of these things. And it's no wonder, because it's so full of contradiction. And diversity being one of the cornerstones of this, it's like the big D in DEI. And
Yeah,
and what does it even mean? Like, diversity of what? Because it's certainly not diversity of thought, because thought
right.
is, and people who come from different cultures are going to grow up with different value sets and different all kinds of things. But we're in the DEI teachings and the multiculturalism teachings, you're not even
Right.
supposed to express interest in the way people are different from you, because that's a microaggression. And and so there's this kind of
Right, right,
flattening of
right,
all
right.
of these things, and that becomes very confusing. So we're supposed to celebrate multiculturalism, but there's no way to celebrate that. Even if you wanted to be celebratory and say, this is really interesting, tell me about that, then you're exoticizing the other. And now that's a
It's a
microaggression. So
microaggression
don't
too.
do that. So you are supposed to not be colorblind because that's really bad, but you're never supposed to point out or notice the things that are different about the other. And that's one of the things that I think ties people in knots. Like, how do we even discuss this? How do we even work
And
within this?
and for most people, maybe most is a strong word these days, but definitely historically, I think for most people, the speech rules get internalized as thought rules.
Mm,
And so people like you can really think about how this plays out for most people. Like a psychodynamic, psychoanalytic paradigm is very, very helpful because they become not just rules about what you can say externally, but rules about what you can feel, what
mm,
you can think, what you can remember, what you can perceive. Like it's like what you can desire. And that sets people up to be very dysregulated on these
mhm,
things. And they clearly are because it's so rare to see people with the capacity to have a mature dialogue about these issues that's dialectical and nuanced. It's just people go to like the one side or the other and they get very dysregulated or they avoid it entirely. The number of people that can actually have a conversation that's involves reflective functioning and nuance is just very rare. And it's because that's essentially forbidden,
mm,
to even entertain that racial or ethnic diversity has costs and risks associated with it, has through the present day been a absolutely forbidden line of reasoning. And it's that's so strange because obviously it's going to have pros and cons, even if you're
mhm,
a big proponent of it. And not being able to talk about the costs and risks really it kind of ensures that we're going to be blindsided by them.
mhm, mhm,
Like they're just going to seem like they're coming out of the blue and then we don't know how to respond to them and huge blind spots with everything that doesn't fit on that everything that's not good about diversity. And you can kind of see the people, a lot of people, I think, especially elites, that part of what's enabled them to rise to the level of elites is being very good at repressing thoughts that they're not supposed to have and feelings they're not supposed to have. And so that leads them with this really incomplete understanding of the world where they have these huge blind spots that they can't even tolerate talking about or listening to and you see that I think you see that in particular in the social justice movement a
mhm,
lot.
mhm. Well, and when you talk about the risks of or the costs of multiculturalism, that we're kind of tying ourselves in knots around trying to avoid talking about within these DEI frames, these multicultural perspectives frames.
Yeah.
Um, I think about the concept of culture shock and of, these even within the United States, and we're not even talking about different necessarily ethnic groups, but people do things very differently. And so you move to a new place or someone visits from a different place and you find all these ways that life varies or structures and patterns of life vary. And there's always going to be a little bit of a cost to that because there's going to be lag in learning the new rules,
Yes.
learning the way people do things, fitting in with their customs, trying not to offend or trying not to do the wrong thing. And it does seem like a lot of that is getting lost in these conversations, even though the
Yeah.
conversations themselves represent a massive burden and a challenge that is insurmountable. It's kind of like we've talked about the original sin of whiteness, which is this
Yeah.
thing that you can never be free of. You can never attain some kind of good white person status within the DEI
Right.
framework. You just
Right.
have to be someone who's perpetually doing the work by kind of talking about and perpetuating thoughts about how whiteness is a negative thing.
I mean, and that mentality is so unhealthy. I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about this, as especially as we're thinking about starting to research what harms these ideologies have caused for people, is that the harms are probably much greater for the people who internalize this stuff than the people who feel attacked and self-censor.
Hmm.
The people who are likely to complain and say there's a problem and they're frustrated about self-censoring or being isolated, and you know, that they're probably suffering a lot less. Not that they're not, it's not painful and difficult, but like they're probably suffering a lot less than the people who fully internalize this, because it's a type of inner torment that they're inducing to people that you really shudder to think about how this is really mangling people's heart and mind and soul with this
Hmm.
kind of thinking. And I think, but going back to the question about like multicultural, I mean, I think that it is fair to say that the idea of a radically diverse multicultural nation is a very ambitious social project. And I think that that's just was totally lost. And because we were dissociating it,
Hmm.
I mean, and because we were repressing that reality, it was all good and got swept up in this. And I think really understated, like, especially if there's not assimilation,
Hmm.
everybody keeps a different culture, no assimilation, radically diverse, multicultural democracy. And we're going to radically change the entire West in a couple decades to this new thing. That is pretty fucking ambitious. Like, I just like, and so to think like there's no risk, there's no cost, there's no challenge, it's kind of shocking that we could even have lived through a culture that thought that way
Hmm.
and still does by and large. Like like still has trouble talking about like, yes, this is a very ambitious project.
Hmm.
But I think that um the danger here partly is that um, if diversity is like idealized in this really dysfunctional way, the other side of the split is that it just becomes totally demonized and people just totally lose faith in the multicultural project or split the opposite way. And I think that is the real danger here.
Hmm.
Because I think like just thinking about what percentage of society needs to think that diversity is so dysfunctional or such a threat to their freedom or culture or dignity or fair treatment or so painful or so undesirable that they really don't want it and are willing to
Hmm.
fight against it. You
Hmm.
know, you don't need a lot of people thinking that for to have a severely destabilized society. Like a lot of
Hmm.
revolutions, it's like 10% of people support a radical ideology. Like you
Hmm.
don't need, like, I don't know what percentage of Syria was in ISIS, but I think it was like 20%.
Hmm.
20% of Syria in ISIS and your country's over.
Hmm.
So I think the idea of you don't need a ton of people really losing faith in this for it to totally be a nightmare. It's I mean that some ways it's an escalation, but I think it's important to really be aware of these risks so that we can respond to them
Hmm.
rather than continuing to pretend that this isn't as ambitious of a project with risks that I think we just and nope. I don't know if maybe other people knew this the whole time and were just self-censoring,
Hmm.
but I think if I had to guess, I think most people who weren't talking about this dynamic, they were just um, maybe they just hadn't clicked for them. But I think there's also this motivated element of like it's such a forbidden line of thought that
Hmm.
people kill it before it can happen.
Yeah, and it's, the fact that the US has been multicultural, so to speak, since it became a nation. I mean, we've had so
Not,
many immigrants here,
but yeah, but not as
not as much.
multicultural as
Well,
not, yeah,
it used to be known as the melting pot. This was like this idea. We talked about it
right.
as this idea of assimilation. You all come from different
Yes,
places, but once you get here, you're
right,
American. And we are made up of lots of things, and that's our strength, and we can talk about it that way. And the ideal, at least
right,
when I was a kid,
right.
the ideal that you kind of picked up culturally was this colorblind ideal where we just see each other as people and we
Yes.
don't judge each other based on, our background. We try to see the
Right.
humanity of the individual and the merit that that individual brings to whatever situation or relationship. And
Right.
the it was interesting to me, it was quite shocking to me actually to be told in the context of counselor education that color blindness is a really big taboo. That is
Right.
not that is something we're not to say, we're not to think. And at the same time, there's these demonizing of different elements of this race or that race. Mostly the white race was, this heavily criticized group, and the
Right.
segregation. You sort of touched on that in
Right.
what you were
Right.
saying at the outset, how we were put into groups. Here's your BIPOC group, which is everybody but white, and here's your white group, so that you can
Right.
talk about things separately and remind each person of the importance of color. But then such tricky rules about how to go about doing that it's
Right.
impossible to figure out how to do any of these things. And so it does lead to a great deal of disorganization. And I also see that backlash that you're talking about being that's a very possible potential for people to just get sick of having this rammed down their throats with impossible standards to meet. And then feeling
Ye-
like we just want to give up on that whole project. We just want to give up on thinking that we can talk to each other.
Yeah, I think like just to go like when you look, I mean, we're in the mental health field, but when I see requests for therapists on listservs that I'm on, it's not uncommon that race and ethnicity lead and clinical specialization is absent.
Hmm,
The only thing that they really care about the therapist is the race.
hmm,
And that's very common.
hmm,
And it's just worth like pausing to say, if that's needed, if that's really the world, that's really the way it is, that people need that,
hmm,
uh, we're totally screwed. Like this isn't gonna work. And I think and so I think you can kind of argue one, but not both. You can say, yeah, you really do need somebody with your culture and who knows your experiences, and you really got to have that. Um, And it's like it's also interesting too because it's like, hey, if you get to have such a strong race preference in therapists, maybe why couldn't you have the same preference in your friends, in your romantic partner, and who you want to work with? Like it's like there's like why not? You're gonna work better with your own race, I guess, you know? So I think that there's like there the ideas aren't fully thought through, where it's
yeah.
like if that's really true, and that's the principle. Like none of this is going to work, you know,
Mhm,
and I think that's just not connected for people under the model that you spelled out,
mhm,
where it's like immigration is slow and legal, they assimilate, it merit-based free speech, you know, American patriotism, whatever it is, like these certain level of like, I think the old school model of
mhm,
how immigration worked, you know, the costs of diversity are pretty low,
mhm,
you know, but the more you stack up, like, I mean, I remember hearing lectures in graduate school that every psychological test, not just IQ, but executive functioning, personality, mental disorders, every psychological test needed to be redesigned for every ethnic group based on their specific culture and country of origin. And it's like just redoing the psychological testing makes this not viable. But
mhm,
if we have to do that in every industry and in every field, then there's no hope here, really.
mhm,
Like, and um, yeah, and I think that we're kind of like this is all it's coming to a head. People are being confronted with thoughts and feelings that they haven't been able to tolerate feeling. And I think that's why I think there's a lot more uh radical psychological change that still needs to happen. Like, we're not at a place where we can really talk about a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot that's still being repressed and that people can't tolerate hearing and that's not thought through. And so, and I don't know, I don't know where it's going.
Mhm.
I really think, uh, it's, it's really, maybe there'll be kind of like an about face and it'll be like, let's go back to the 90s model of how immigration should work and
Mhm.
try to resurrect that. And we made a mistake. Boy, it's hard to imagine that really happening, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, one of the things, as you're talking about immigration and also about the ability or the acceptability of people to select people in their own race or of a specific race, or
right.
select away from people of a specific race in order
Yeah, yeah.
to, have professional relationships or whatever it is, like selecting a therapist.
Well, it was
I,
just to hit the nail. I
yeah,
mean,
no,
the only group that you're not allowed to request is a white
that's
therapist,
right. And
and
that's
the
the
only
thing I wanted
group
to bring up. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
and the only group that you're allowed to say you specifically don't want is a white therapist. You can say you want
Yeah.
a BIPOC therapist. There, you can't say I don't want a, you know, South Asian therapist. Like you
Right.
can't say,
Well, the BIPOC thing too, this is something that I thought when we were working through the multiculturalism stuff, in my program, was the BIPOC group. What is that? Because that's just lumping everybody who's not
right, right,
of
right, right,
European ancestry into one big group. And so they
right.
have I if you're talking about multiculturalism and respecting diverse cultures, there's so much diversity just within that heading of BIPOC that
Yeah,
it becomes a meaningless category. But if you're in that category, whoever you are there, you can select and affiliate with people of your own racial background or cultural background, and that's acceptable. But there's a double bind placed on the people who are in the white group. So if you're white, you cannot say, I want to affiliate with people of the BIPOC group specifically, because that's stay in your lane
right, right,
and don't do that.
right.
But you also cannot say that you want to only affiliate with or work with people who are white. So it is very confusing. I think it's just
Eh,
inherently a confused
yes.
ideology.
And think about for people who agree with that,
Mhm.
especially white people who agree with that, think about how much thought killing you have to do
Mhm. Yeah.
to not ask the question and not say, wait a second.
Yeah.
Like you have to kill a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings. You have to be just a constant exterminator of,
Yeah.
of that stuff. And I think it's super unhealthy.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you can see how it does so much damage to people. I think it's also like it's really unhealthy for people of color who internalize this too, and they often become, see white people as causing all their problems and feel totally, powerless and become more paranoid and angry, and it puts them on such a negative path to uh it probably very much hurts them more than helps them in even in the short term, but definitely long term. So
Hmm.
it's just like, but I think it's just the root of it, just going back clinically, like
Hmm.
the real root is the inability to talk about pros and cons related to diversity, as any mature adult should be able to do. And the fact that that isn't, not only it's not reflected in our discourse, I don't think we have the capacity, the psychological maturity as a society to have those conversations. That's that's pretty dysfunctional. Like so it's I think it's and I think it'll be a bumpy road to get to the place where we could start to talk about some of those things.
Yeah. When you talk about thought killing, absolutely. The repression of the ability even to just raise the intellectual concepts, the anxiety involved in and sitting there in these confusing soups of ideas and not be able to just say, could we talk about that? What does that mean? How I see these issues are raised, can we just discuss? And people are so bound up and repressed that they're not able to have those discussions where they need to be taking place.
And on the other hand, like there is this sense of like there's this inability to engage, and the content, and I think partly because it's been repressed and dissociated for so long, is like all that much more explosive. And it's like this
Mhm.
is really like civilizational level questions that are hugely consequential for our ability to have a viable society long term and get along with each other. Like this is like, and things that evoke intense emotions, and the scale is intense. And it's like the longer it's boxed out of the conversation, it's like the more like
Mm.
infected and intense and weird and toxic it becomes. And it just is harder and harder to think about how do we start to talk about this stuff. Um,
I'll tell you before we wrap up this conversation, a quick anecdote from when I was in counselor training and I was in a group therapy class. I actually really liked my group therapy class. And we were sitting around in a circle and the question came up, this discuss the statement, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it was like the 2 minutes hate started from 1984, and the women who were in the group really hated this statement. This was so offensive. This was a terrible thing to say. And then this man piped up, and he was an immigrant. He was from an Asian country, and just he piped up and he said, I think it's a good statement about strength and resilience and overcoming challenge. And the silence that settled was really uncomfortable because it was like, here we are talking about all, you could just feel the identities, the culture, the multiculturalism, the perspectives, the
right,
the
right, right.
femaleness and the maleness and all the different categories were just like splayed out in this really uncomfortable way. And there was no good resolution to that because of the pre-programmed hate for certain concepts within this multicultural model. You know, it's all about supporting the marginalized. So you can never say that something that has made you a victim has been in any way positive for you. So, you know,
Right,
it was an
right,
interesting
right.
thing to see all the identities collide and clash like that.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, and what a tragic thing for patients or anybody dealing with hardship to think like that that the therapist says you are weaker and worse off because of this, and there's no upside of
There's
you
no
having been to
upside.
this at all.
Yeah.
You know, that's your therapy for today.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just like, but my guess is, yeah, I don't know if they were limiting it just to thinking about the DEI stuff, or if it was in another context of somebody who had faced a different type of
Hmm.
adversity, if they would have what they
Yeah.
would have said. But
Who knows? But it was
yeah,
interesting to observe.
yeah.
Well, thank you for raising this topic and exploring it. There are so many contradictions within a lot of this ideological thinking. I'm sure there's much more we could find
We
to.
have to, and we have to start talking. It's a tricky thing because when you start talking, it's messy and you make mistakes, and that's kind
Mhm.
of just a part of talking about any issue is like you change your mind or whatever. But you have to do that in order to have enough reflective functioning to actually talk about these things and think and feel about these things
Mhm.
in a mature way. And I think that's a huge part of why the discourse makes no sense and why people are so dysregulated.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, before we close, do you want to say a little bit more about our workshops that are coming up?
Yeah, we have a couple really great workshops coming up. One of them is in February. It's on February 15th, Saturday, February 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. It's 2.5 hours. We've got four great talks. One is about OCD related to cancel culture. So this is people who have intrusive thoughts that they're going to say or do something racist or that's going to get them canceled. We have another talk on working with religious patients. We have a talk on working with gun owners and cultural and clinical issues with that population, and another woman talking about abortion issues that come up for women in session and a variety of perspectives on that. So, four really interesting, important, overlooked populations that I think have a lot of nuance and things to say about them. Again, that's a 2.5 hour workshop. I mean, one of the person talking about OCD is Dean McKay, who's just like, I think, a really impressive, leading researcher on OCD from a CBT perspective at Fordham. And the other speakers are all really impressive. Neil Kressel, Robin Atkins, and Jake Wiskerchin are just like really great, real experts in their area. In March, we have a talk, March 16th at 12 p.m. It's on men's issues. We've got three talks: biases against men that occur in therapy, men's experience of anti-male aggression and bias, and then a particular lecture on false accusations of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment. Um, Really interesting talks. I think that'll be a really rich one. We want to keep having these every month. We have, for each workshop, we've got at least three groundbreaking talks. Usually none of them have been done anywhere in the mental health field before. And we really encourage people to come to these because that really enables us to keep doing this scholarship. And I think this is a really crucial step where we're starting to map the terrain of overlooked issues and start to really transform the field. So the support now is so helpful. Signing up for the workshops, becoming a member, those things really, really help us. It's not even just about the money. I mean, the workshops are often heavily discounted and but it's really about just showing up and showing that you care about this stuff. And connecting to other people in the field. It just really makes us stronger. So I encourage everyone to do that.
And who can attend the workshops?
Anybody can attend. They're designed for therapists looking for continuing ed credit for their license. We try to make sure that they're very accessible in terms of like not overly jargony and difficult, but anybody can attend. They're designed to be postgraduate level training for therapists, but we really prioritize accessibility.
And for those who are interested in the topics being raised by each speaker, there's a Q&A that follows each presentation. So you can submit your questions in the chat and interact with the speaker through that means. So it's really a great way to engage with these ideas.
And then we usually the attendees meet with the speakers afterwards, and we have some time on Zoom to do that. And it's a way of getting a feel of the Open Therapy Institute. If you're considering a membership, members have a lot more activities that they can participate in. And that really helps us too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. And I hope everybody
Thanks,
goes and
Leslie.
checks that out. We'll put the links in the description. So if you'd like to go check out the workshops and the website for Open Therapy Institute, it's opentherapyinstitute.org. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.